Welcome back to Africa This Week. Well, these are interesting times for Africa, with the world extending more bilateral handshakes towards the continent in what some have termed the Western scramble for the African pie. Recent weeks have seen visits from Emmanuel Macron of France, Theresa May of Britain and Angela Merkel of Germany. And just when you think you can't have enough of the West, Africa turns east towards China. Now, joining me to dig deep on Africa this week is Adeniyi Kunnu, researcher and policy analyst. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Now, what did you take away from the just concluded FOCAC summit?
It's about having your mouth where your money is. If you look at between 2000 and 2018, China has actually invested $130 billion US as far as businesses are concerned on the African continent. And it still has about $60 billion US in waiting to invest. And if one also considers the Belt and Road Initiative, also known as the One Belt, One Road Initiative, where China intends to connect 70 countries, you know, from Asia to Africa to Western, to Eastern Europe or Southern Europe, you find out that it's a big project. As we speak, the countries like India, like Pakistan, like New Zealand, and Russia, of course, Iran, Iraq, most of these countries, even Afghanistan, are part of this initiative, but the ones that are actively there occupies a third of the GDP of the world. So it's a big project, even taking away Africa from it, or looking beyond Africa, but because Africa is the focus now, you find out that the Chinese government has indeed been spending big with the intention to create a lot of things for the continent. Let me even say this, that maybe for the records now, China already has a military base in one of the horns of Africa, that's Djibouti. At the moment, 70% of Djibouti's debts is owed by China, it's owed to China. So
is that a bit worrying, do you think?
Well, I think that in every situation where you find out that there's need for you to get help, you have to consider the opportunities before you and jump at the one that really perhaps looks the best for you, which to me is what a lot of these African countries have actually been doing. And if we look at it, I think ECOWAS has immensely benefited from many of the initiatives of the Chinese government. And as I said, as we speak now, we have 30,000 businesses owned by China on the African continent. Germany has about 1,200. The Britain, I can tell you, surely doesn't have up to that. And I must also say now that after the European Union that has traded with Africa in the past 5 years to the tune of over $300 billion US, China is next with about $188 billion US. So when you consider what China has done in Africa in the past 10, 18 years or 20, you can tell assuredly that many of these African countries will be interested in going into more relationship, business and otherwise with China. It's
a bit unsettling to actually grapple all of that information. But critics have described this recent romance with Africa by the foreign bigger economies as a gold rush and then a scramble for Africa. What's your take and why do you think this is at this point in time?
Well, if you look at it, the era of slavery technically is over. It's the era of new knowledge as well as human resource. New knowledge by virtue of what human beings are able to bring to the table. And of course, human beings themselves, because they are the engineers of this initiative that you have everywhere. And if you look at Africa for China, Africa appears the new bride because China, up until the past, let me say 25, 27 years, perhaps have not discovered the sweetness in coming to see into the potentialities of the African continent. But for Europe, up until China's incursion into Africa, they saw Africa as second-hand. They saw Africa as a country, or as a continent, I beg your pardon, that we've conquered and that we can dictate to. But China brought something new to the table, which is that we are not interested in the governance of Africa. We're interested in making profits from businesses in Africa and also for your countries in Africa to make certain profits as available from our own countries. As a matter of fact, I do not think any country actually does so much exports to Africa in recent times as China does.
As much as China does.
As much as China does. So I think strongly that the healthier alternative for Africa is that unlike what we've had in the past where many countries of the West will always interfere in the governance of the African continent. China essentially is not interested. It is only interested essentially in doing business, making money, and finding an expansion of particularly raw materials for the ever-growing countries back home in Asia. So, and it's at that point, I must say here, that the West became very unsettled, that we thought this country was good enough to be conquered, but some other persons are discovering new things to do with the African continent. Investing on the continent. Yeah. And I think it's time for us to really wield our powers. But the days are over, I must say that. It's only a matter of time. By 2030, I must say emphatically that you'd have China, without much ado, take over the economy as the number one. Because at the moment, even China's trade input in Africa is more than the United States. If you consider the EU, China is second, followed by the US. The US has only traded the past 5 years with Africa to the tune of about $56 billion US. Britain is at a very distasteful fourth, which actually conquers much of Africa by virtue of its influence. The businesses that are done with Africa in the past 5 years is to the tune of about $36 billion US.
Well, Theresa May is trying to work on that. And
but if you look at $188 billion US to $36 billion for a country, both the countries, if you look at the United States, unarguably with a very powerful economy in the world, it has traded just less than $100 billion US with Africa.
So let's ask you now, do you think this continuous Chinese benevolence on Africa is a form of new imperialist arrangement?
Well, it will become imperialism if African leaders are not able to look at how they could become near equals in their trade relationship and other kinds of relationship with the Chinese government. Okay. Because if you look at it, there is always a tendency for anybody who is financially superior to you or technologically advanced than you to take advantage where the opportunity actually presents itself. Yeah. 2 weeks plus ago, the Minister of Health, Federal Minister of Health, Professor Isaac Adeniyi, was in China. As a matter of fact, he was on Chinese Global Television Network. And he said something that is instructive here. He mentioned that what Africa needs, particularly because he was on the show with the health minister of, I think, Uganda, as well as the one from, I think, Zambia, one other African country. There were 3. And what Isaac Adeniyi said was that what Africa needs from China now, particularly in the health sector, is an equal of soft infrastructure apart from hard infrastructure. And what does he mean by that? Well, we've had, machines and all of the technologically advanced, health systems, particularly the hardware, coming to Africa to help us maybe in things like dialysis and some kind of health situations. But now he expects Africa to bring his expertise into the country and see how it could make better the things that perhaps we are obviously lacking. If you look at this particular time, the health sector itself is not doing very well because we've had our president visit the United Kingdom more than once over the past 3 years for health reasons. And I can tell you for the records that nobody within the upper echelons of power does a health check in this country. So if you have a situation where some other countries don't have their leaders go out to attend to their health, then I think it's an anomaly for our leaders who have told us that they intend to promote the health sector and make it functional.
We could go on and on, but
most definitely.
Yeah, but let me tell you this now. During this FOCAC summit, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, he told African leaders that China's investments on the continent have no political strings attached to it. What are your thoughts?
That is good for the ears, but in practice and principle, it may be difficult. Because the stain that he or she who pays the piper dictates the tune is as old and as true as in 2018. So you may not want to allow that sink in, or else you'll be deluded into thinking that all that glitters is indeed gold, whereas there are other materials that it could just quote and present as gold. One thing that would make Africa not look like another ridicule in the eyes of China is to be able to up the ante of how it operates at the moment. Don't forget, part of the signatures put down in China by this government.
Up the ante for Africa again?
You really must up the ante, because if you look at it, Nigeria is the most populous black nation in the world. Nigeria only generates nothing up to 7,500 megawatts of electricity. That is really, really a problem. And if we want to build any economy, particularly developing small and medium-scale enterprises, it is of the zenith of importance to ensure that you make such things happen as would allow for power consistency in terms of electricity. That is a challenge because we're talking about building infrastructure. Infrastructure don't run on my saliva. They run on PMS, they run on diesel, they run on other forms of solvents.
Energy.
Energy. So if you look at that part, it's also an instructive point for us to take into cognizance that we have to do much more than we're doing now. And let's not forget that part of the signatories that they held down there was to ensure that they're able to help build the Mambila Power, a project that can generate about 3,050 megawatts of electricity.
Yeah.
Also, do not forget there's a $328 million US project in ICT. So these are very good looking,
right.
But we need to work more to make things happen.
If I let you go on, you wouldn't stop. Adeniyi Kunnu,
thank you very much.
Researcher and policy analyst. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, in a world where no nation can survive in isolation, China-Africa relations comes with great potentials and a need to move from an unbalanced marriage of convenience to a partnership based on win-win cooperation. But at the risk of becoming a partially owned subsidiary of China, Africa must look within and take advantage of opportunities elsewhere to grow relevance, strengthen independence, and unleash an incredible level of greatness. That's our program today, and I have been your guide, Fadeshala Shotingwa. Many thanks for watching, and bye for now.